Hey guys, just with JHart Modelworks. It is time to get started on the 69 Mustang Restomod, and this video is going to be all about prepping the body. Now I know a lot of times when I do these build series, I do the body prep and the paint all in one go, but adding this C1 body kit in is going to be a lot of additional work, and I'm doing some slight modification to the hood as well, so I felt that it would be better if we go ahead and split these two up. So since we got a lot of work ahead of us, let's go ahead and get the camera flipped around and get to work. We're starting things off by getting rid of those mold seams. We got to get rid of these before we can do anything else, so I'm going to mark them out with a Sharpie marker, and then we're going to sand these with a 400 grit sponge back sandpaper. I like using the sponge back paper as it will conform better to the shape of the car, and it'll cause less flattening to the body lines. We don't want to accidentally sand off or reshape things, we just want to remove the raised plastic where the mold seams meet. Once you have all the markers sanded off, you should be pretty smooth. But it's always good to periodically give the body a rub over with a finger or a thumb to see if you feel any rough edges. While removing the mold seams on the rear, be careful as there are several body panels in the way and there is a naturally sharp body line along the back edge. We don't want to accidentally round this off too much. The mold seam in this back corner of the window is particularly troublesome. You do not want to end up sanding off the window trim or gouging the C-pillar while trying to clean this area up. On the other side, I chose to take just some regular 400 grit paper and fold it over to get in these tight corners. Now, the front and rear panels have mold lines on them as well, so don't forget to clean those up. Also, this plastic running along here is very thin, so be gentle and don't push too hard. Let the sandpaper do the work for you. With the mold seams gone, our next step is to deepen all the panel lines. Now we don't need to go crazy here, but we do want to make sure they're nice and deep so they don't fill up with paint and clear coat. Also, we want to make sure there's no debris left in here from the molding process in the panel lines. We're going to be using the Tamiya engraving tool with the 0.2mm bit. We want to give each panel line a good 4 or 5 passes. Take your time here, as jumping out the lines means gouging the body, and that means a lot more work filling and sanding later. We already have a lot of that to do. There's no point in adding more if we don't have to. This tool is admittedly expensive, but it is one of the best scribers out there for long, straight, or slightly curved lines. Work like the trunk and the door panel lines. This tool excels at that. The window trim detail is very soft. We're going to rescribe that so that when we go back later to do bare metal foil, it'll be easier to do with nice clean trim lines. Once we get the panel lines scribed out, I like to hit them with some Tamiya panel line accent color. I'm not doing this to pre-shade the panel lines. We're going to be using black primer. They will get plenty dark. I do this because if I have jumped out of the lines and scratched the body, but maybe I didn't see it or realize it, this panel liner will run into those scratches and they will show up like a sore thumb against the white body. So I can go back and fill them with some CA glue or some putty and clean them up. We then want to come back with a paper towel and some odorless mineral spirits to clean away any excess wash off the flat surfaces. I'm not concerned about contaminating the body. We're going to do a lot of things that will do that. So when we're done with everything, we're going to give it a good wash with some Dawn dish soap and warm water, and then we're going to follow that with a rub down with some UMP airbrush cleaner or some isopropyl alcohol. On the 1-to-1 car, at the bottom of this A-pillar, there should be a panel line at the bottom of the chrome trim. We're going to cut this panel line in with a razor saw. We want to make absolutely sure we do not cut all the way through this A-pillar. We don't want to go more than maybe halfway through, just enough to make the line present. Then, using the gun primer needle style scriber, we're going to clean that line up a little bit. With this being a Restomod build, I plan to use modern disc brakes, so I also want to use a more modern master cylinder. The firewall has a raised area that the kitmaster cylinder sits over and around, so using a number 11 sawtooth blade, I'm going to carefully cut away the raised surface from the firewall. Don't lose this little piece though, we're going to use it to fill the hole we just made. We want to apply some Tamiya Extra Thin to the piece we just cut out, and apply some to the inside of the firewall. We then need to carefully fit this bit of plastic back into that hole. Once it's in place, we'll add a little Tamiya Extra Thin to the surface of the firewall, and once all that is cured up, we'll come back in with some 400 grit, and we're going to smooth it all out. The next thing we want to do is remove the molded in kit battery, as I plan to replace it with an Optima 3D printed one. Using our two scribing tools, we want to start by scribing the plastic all around the battery. We want to create panel lines all along the sides and bottom to make it easier to cut away the battery with a saw. While the Tamiya scriber is good for back and forth lines with its push-pull motion, the needle scriber gives us the flexibility to also scribe from side to side and at angles. So it's really useful to have one of both styles, even if you have to make the needle style with just a needle and a mechanical pencil body. Once we have our line scribed, we can then come in with the sawtooth blade and start working the blade back and forth through the new lines until it starts to cut its way through. Now on the top, I again scribe a nice deep line along the back of the battery, and then once it was thin, I used a regular number 11 blade to poke a hole into the plastic. This let me slide that sawtooth blade into the hole and make much faster work cutting along this line. Eventually, we'll make that last cut and the battery will pop off and fly away. This leaves us with a giant hole we're going to want to fill. We'll start by sanding all the edges to smooth them out as best as we can. Once those are cleaned up, we're going to draw out our pattern, starting with a box in the center for our platform. We're going to put another for the back wall, back behind the battery. We have two sides to deal with, and then I want to go ahead and add a small lip on the front. We're then going to use our calipers to take measurements for all these dimensions, and then I'm going to draw this out again to scale. With it drawn out to scale, we can then lay a piece of tape over the drawing, and we can copy that onto the masking tape. From there, we can transfer the tape over to some aluminum soda can. This material is pretty much free if you drink sodas. It's easy to cut, it's easy to bend, and it's easier to manipulate than bits of sheet plastic. I'm using the Xuron photo etch shears to cut the template. These are essentially just really sharp, tiny tin snips, and they work great for cutting through this aluminum. From here we want to bend everything into shape. You do not need a photo etch bender for this, but I have one and it does make the bends a lot easier than using pliers, so I'm using it to fold everything up. We're going to do a quick test fit. We also want to mark the profile for the back fender on this back side here, and then we can cut off that excess. Once our test fit looks good, we'll then glue everything into place with some CA glue and fill the opening. So after a bit of work, we came back in with some metal files and cleaned up this edge on the aluminum a bit. We also sanded out all the molded in cable detail. We're going to replace that with actual wire later. And we cleaned up this firewall a little bit more as well, and that's going to wrap up our engine bay work. Looking at the instructions, it shows that we can attach the front and rear valences before fitting the body onto the chassis. Since I plan to do a candy paint job, I want as much of this body assembled as possible before we start painting, so we're going to glue these into place with some Tamiya extra thin. We want to apply some to the inside of the body as well as the edge of the back panel, and then we can set it into place and hold it till the glue sets a bit. We then want to come in and add some more Tamiya extra thin to these seams. Now the fit on the front clip isn't fantastic. I did several test fits to make sure that I had a good feel for how it should go into place. Then we're going to go ahead and add some Tamiya extra thin to the front, just like we did with the back. And we're going to add some to the front clip part, and we'll get this set into place as best as we can. After it's set a little bit, I did come back and add a little more Tamiya extra thin to these seams on the outside edges as well, just to help it bond a little better. Once everything has fully cured for a few hours, we're going to come back in with some sanding sponge and smooth out all of these seams. We will be puttying them later, but for right now, we just want to smooth it out as much as we can. I'm going to come in here on the inside and add a bead of CA glue along the inside of that seam. That's going to give us just a little more material on the back side in this corner and help strengthen this seam up so that when we come back later and putty up and smooth out the seam, we'll run less chance of breaking this loose. The fit on this front end isn't all that great. You can see how the body and the front clip don't really line up well. Now, after we get the body kit on, we're going to smooth this out with putty, but for right now, I want to come in with some 400 grit and wet sand this to smooth this out as much as we can so we have less putty to deal with later. Periodically, you want to come in with a brush and clean the sanding dust out of the seams, or it can pack in there and give you a false sense of smoothness, and when you come in and clean it out later, you'll find you have a sharp ridge again. You'll also notice that I'm not being crazy about protecting the lip on this wheel arch either. After we get this body kit on, we're going to end up cutting off quite a bit of this lip anyhow, so that trim is going away. If you aren't using a body kit though, you'd want to be very careful not to reshape the body or remove any of the trim detail. We have some modifications to do to our hood, starting with using some chisels and sandpaper to remove the molded in hood pins. My plan is later to replace these with some photo etch ones from ProTech, if I still have some of those. I may be out. Or maybe I might 3D model up some of my own. But our first step is to take a chisel and remove as much of the raised detail as possible without gouging into the hood. After that, we're going to come in with some 400 grit and 600 grit and sand away the rest of the detail to get the hood nice and smooth. Now I also want to soften the shape of this raised area in the center. This is a personal preference thing, not anything we actually need to do. Some purists are going to be mad at me, but it's a Restomod. This is one of those rare times where I actually do want to change the shape of a body panel with my sanders. Now I want to add a 3D printed hood scoop that I picked up from Pixel 3D's 69 Mustang body kit. Now I bought the STL files for that body kit just for the hood scoop. To add this scoop, we need to start by finding the center of the hood and marking it out on the underside. To do this, I'm going to mark the hood and take measurements all the way across. I'm going to divide that measurement by 2 and then remeasure from our first marks and mark out the center. We want to do this in at least 2 different places, and then we can draw a straight line through them to mark out the center line. We're going to repeat this process on the underside of the hood scoop to mark out the center of the scoop. We're going to make 2 marks on the underside of the scoop to mark out our center. We can then put a piece of tape down, and then using a marker, we'll just mark a line down the very center of the scoop. Once we have our centers marked, we're going to put some tape on the back end of the hood scoop. We're going to line our center marks up, and then we'll just push the tape down onto the hood to hold the hood scoop into place. Once we have our tape holding the hood scoop in place, we can flip the scoop over using the tape as a hinge. We'll then apply some CA glue to the edges of the hood scoop. Next, using a toothpick, we want to spread the CA glue out all along the edges. We want enough glue there to fill and hold the hood in place, but we also want to try and keep it thin so it doesn't ooze out and go everywhere when we try to set the hood scoop back into place. Once we have our glue in place, we'll just take the hood scoop and use the tape to flip the scoop back over and put it into place on the hood. We only have a few seconds here that we can shift it around a little bit as needed to get it perfectly centered again. Now back to the body. I want to use some of my bullet style side mirrors. The 3D files for these are available for sale on my Cults 3D page down in the description below. These are modeled with a hole for a 0.5 mm post. We need to drill a matching hole on the doors. My down-to-scale club brother Bill Koff showed on his Instagram page using the markings on 2 pieces of the scribing tape from gun primer to measure out the holes so you get pretty much an exact matching hole on both sides of the body. Once we have the tape in place, we'll just drill the hole with our pin vise. Next, we're going to make a pilot hole in the center of the door locks. We can then drill another 0.5 mm hole in the center of the lock on each side. Once we get to final assembly, we're going to add in some 1.2 mm Top Studio rivets to look like actual door locks. The door handles on this kit are pretty meh. I have 3D printed some that I've added some 0.5 mm pins to on the inside, but first I want to use some sprue nippers to remove the original door handles. Next, we'll put down some Vallejo black paint and dip the posts in it. We can then tap the wet paint on the door. This will mark where we need to drill the holes for our door handles. With that done, we'll go ahead and use our dead center tool to make pilot holes and drill the openings for our 3D printed door handles. And once our door handles are drilled, we can then come back in with a chisel and remove the excess plastic from the original door handles and sand the surface smooth. The first step to getting this body kit installed, at least for me, is to install these side vents. If we dry fit these lining up the front of the vent, we find the vent doesn't really quite sit flush with the body. Since the back of the vent is slightly rounded, to fix this, I'm going to take a half moon metal file and slowly and carefully file at the back of the opening. I want to test fit this frequently, as I do not want to remove more plastic than I need and create a giant hole in the body. Once I finally have a decent fit, we're going to apply some CA glue to the front and rear of the opening. And then we want to set our side scoop in place so that it sits as flush as possible with the body. Once the CA glue is set, I'm going to go all around the inside and lay a bead of CA glue around the scoop and then hit it with some activator. This will give a bit more bulk behind the scoop and provide a little more support. We don't want this breaking loose later. Now, using a round metal file, I'm going to clean up any flash and smooth out the inside of the air scoop. And once everything is set, we want to add another bead of CA to act as a filler for any gaps between the body and the resin air scoop. We want to be sure to go all the way around the joint. We want everything covered. We're then going to hit this with some activator, let it sit for a few minutes before we come in with our 400 grit display sponge and sand everything smooth. We essentially want to remove all the CA glue, so all that's left is the resin and plastic with the CA only down in between to fill the gaps between them. Now, while sanding, be careful, as there are body lines in this area that we want to protect. We don't want to reshape or flatten out the body. I'm not going to glue the rear spoiler on, as I want to leave it black instead of painting it body color. If you did want to paint it body color though, now would be a really good time to attach it and fill any seams. There is a bit of flash we need to clean up though from the resin casting, and we want to make sure that it will fit properly later. Additionally, on the real car, this spoiler should be 3 separate parts, the 2 ends on the sides, and then the center should run only across the trunk length. To give the illusion that this spoiler is in 3 parts, I'm going to dry fit the spoiler on the body. I'm then going to tape it into place, mark out on the spoiler where the separation should be. I then lay some of that scribing tape along where the panel lines sit, and using our scribing tools, we're going to scribe in some lines to give the appearance that there's separation between the pieces. We'll do another quick test fit, and then we can move on to the fenders. So the way the front fenders sit and how I'm going to install them, they will slightly overlap the front side markers. And since I don't really like the front side markers anyhow, and I would prefer a cleaner, smoother look, I'm going to fill the front and rear side markers with some Tamiya polyester putty, and then I'm going to sand them smooth. Alright guys, it is time to start getting these fenders on. You will notice that one of these has a crease in it, and it has a bit more curve at the bottom. This is the front fender, and this larger, smoother one here in the back is the rear. Now we want to start by cutting the part off the runner down here far away from the part, as resin can be brittle and we don't want to run the risk of breaking the part. Then we'll come back and we'll clip up closer to the part and then sand the edges smooth. Now, when you lay this on here, there's a crease on the inside, and that crease should line up with this line on the body. But you're going to find that when you try to line it up, it doesn't want to sit right. You might think, oh no, I did something wrong, or the body kit isn't molded correctly, or something. It's not. The problem is that this fender lip is preventing the body kit fender from sitting flush on the body. On this side, you can see I've come in with some 240 grit and I've removed that fender lip, and the body kit sits nice and flush now. So we're going to come in with some 240 grit sponge and remove this fender lip. Now this 240 grit is incredibly aggressive. This is going to make very quick work of this lip. However, you do not want to get scratches from this on the body. They will be very deep, very hard to remove, and they will show up in your paint job. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come at this from an angle at the inside of the wheel well, and I'm going to sand at an angle that ensures my paper never comes in contact with the outside of the body. Now this is going to take quite a while, and this video is going to be pretty long, so I'm going to go ahead and just fast forward us ahead into the future. And after about another 20 minutes, we've gotten it pretty well knocked out. This is as good as it's going to get. We want to apply some CA glue to the inside of the body kit fender, and we want to smear it with a toothpick so that it's nice and thin, it's smooth, and it's evenly distributed. We don't want the CA glue to ooze out and get all over the body when we set this in place, but we want to make sure that it covers all of the plastic under the resin fender. We will then set the fender in place, preferably without gluing it to me first. Now we only have a few seconds. We want to get this lined up in place as best as we can, as quickly as possible, without smearing the glue everywhere. Now this back corner wants to pop loose on us, but if we hold it down for a few seconds while the glue cures, it will glue and hold down. The rear over fenders don't have near as much trouble with that lip as the fronts did. I will go ahead and flatten the lip out a bit, but it doesn't need near as much work as the fronts do. Alright, the wide body fenders are on, but we still have a long ways to go before I'm happy with it. The next thing we need to do is come in and remove all the excess material from the original fenders. Now ignore this putty for right now. I'm filming out of order. So here's what happened. I was working on it late at night and I forgot to hit record. So I didn't get the footage when I removed the excess on the first side. I realized I was tired, and decided to call it a night before I messed something up, and I just recorded the other side when I got home from work the next day. I got home from work the next day and I was excited and went straight into putty and realized, oh hey, I still have to film and remove the excess on this other side. So we're going to show you removing that right now. To remove this excess, there's a couple of different ways we can do it. First, we can come in with some really aggressive sandpaper like this 180 grit and start sanding away. This is probably the least efficient way to do this. It's going to take forever and we aren't doing that. Method 2 is to take a hobby knife and come in here and start carving away the excess plastic. This will be much faster. You get the idea here, just come in and whittle away at the fender. The most efficient way to do this is to take a sanding wheel on a rotary tool and go to town. Now I picked this one up on Amazon for about 15 bucks. It's cheap, it is light, it is cordless, and it is no longer available. The thing I really like about this one is that it goes down to 3,000 RPM, which is safer for polishing. Almost every other rotary tool out there, all the brand name ones, especially the ones like Dremel, they all stop at 5,000. Now, like I said, this one's no longer available, but if you search, you will often find one on the entire list that will go down below 5,000 RPMs. It usually goes down to 3,000. If you find one, I would grab one. Like I said, it is a little bit safer, not a whole lot safer, but it is a little bit safer for polishing than the 5,000 RPMs. Now for what we're doing here, I'm going to go ahead and set this to level 2 or 3, and we're going to come in here and we're just going to grind away at the excess plastic. Now be careful and don't hit the actual body. You can really mess things up really quick with this coarse paper spinning this fast. We want to angle the tool in so that it angles inward towards the underside and just follows the underside of the body. Now while you're doing this, don't stay in one place for too long. Don't put a whole lot of pressure in. It doesn't take that much. Just keep moving and work your way around the area. Now we're going to come in with our 180 grit and we're going to remove any burrs and debris left by the rotary tool. Now that's going to get rid of the bulk of it. So from here we're going to go ahead and wet sand with some 240 grit. And finally, we're going to finish it off with some 400 grit to get everything nice and smooth. When it's all said and done, this is what we'll end up with, nice and smooth. I beveled the inside a bit, so when we tuck our wheels in, they'll sit nice and clean and we don't have to worry about any plastic hanging down and interfering with our wheel fitment. When you're sanding like this, it is possible you may find some holes between the body and the body kit, where there was a pocket between the resin and the plastic. When you find something like this, you want to go in and carefully fill them with some putty or CA glue. I use CA. Put a little bit of CA in there, let it sit and harden, or add some activator to speed it up, and then go back in and sand it all smooth. I'm going to go ahead and knock the other one out off camera, then we can come back to filling the seams between the body and the body kit with some putty to make a smooth, seamless transition because we haven't done that yet. So when I do these wide body kits, I like for them to not look like a wide body kit. That's just my preference, but I like my body mods to be subtle. You know, it's not stock, but it's not too obvious. If you prefer the bolt-on look, then by all means skip this and save yourself a lot of work. But I'm going to start by mixing up some Tamiya polyester putty. This is a 2-part putty and hardener. The way to mix it is to spread out a line of the white putty, then an equal length of the yellow-orange hardener. When you mix them together, it should turn yellow. You know you've got the mix right when it's about the same color as the yellow cap on the putty. Once mixed, we're going to apply the putty all along the seams where the resin kit meets the plastic. You want to apply plenty of putty so that it crosses both surfaces smoothly, but you don't want to just glob it on as we will be sanding and removing most of this later. You want to apply it on, then spread it so that it's fairly smooth. I prefer to use my finger to smooth it out. Alright, so our putty's been sitting overnight and it's nice and cured. So what we want to do now is come in and remove pretty much all of it back off. We just want to leave what's in between the seam between the body and the fender and give it a good smooth transition. Now I'm going to start aggressively with this 240 grit sanding sponge from Display. We have some water here and we're going to wet sand this away. This is why I didn't just glob the putty on earlier. The more putty you put on, the more work you have to put into taking it all back off. Now this is a lot of work. It's going to take a lot of time. You want to sand down the entire line of putty, so let's just go ahead and jump ahead a bit. Once we have the bulk of that thinned down, we're going to switch over to our 400 grit thick sponge and keep working at it. There's going to be a lot of jumping ahead through this section. That's going to get us to about here. We're going to refine this a bit more by switching to a thin pad. The thinner the sponge part of the sanding pad is, the tighter that curve gets. And the tighter that curve gets, the tighter we can get in on this groove. Another thing to point out here are these body lines. We do not want to change or accidentally remove this body line. So with our thinner sponge sander, we can get in here a little bit better to remove more of this putty and try to retain more of that bodyline shape. Again, on this side, we have that body line, so instead of just going up and down with it, I'm going back and forth this way to try and thin the putty as much as I can while maintaining all the shapes of the fenders in the body. Alright, now we're going to go ahead and step up to the 600 grit. Again, we're using a thin sponge, and we're going to finish off the sanding. And that is where we're going to end up. Now I'm going to go ahead and do the rest of these off camera. There is no point in having you sit and watch me sand on these for another couple of hours. So normally when I'm done with my body prep, I just give the body a real quick once over with some 1000 or maybe 3000 grit Tamiya sanding sponge, and then it's good for primer. But we have been doing a lot of aggressive body work on this. We have been sanding with very aggressive sanding grits like 240 and 400 grit. We have been applying putties, glues, CA activator, various other chemicals to the body. We've had our oily hands all over the body. Skin just naturally exudes oils, and they can contaminate your surface and cause adhesion issues or, paint issues. So for this kit, we're going to start by sanding the entire body with some Dispace 600 grit sponge back sandpaper. Well, I didn't get the footage. We also hit the body with some 800 grit as well, and then we moved on to the 1000 grit Tamiya sanding sponge. Now we're not going crazy with the sanding. We don't want to reshape anything or remove any detail. We're just giving the whole body a light sand to clean off the surfaces, smooth out any major scratches in the plastic, and create a rough surface that our primer can grab onto. Now between every grit of sandpaper, I throw out the water and I get fresh water to wet sand with. If you keep the same old water, you're going to get the sanding material from the lower grit sanders onto your current sandpaper, and you're going to end up putting deeper scratches into the plastic rather than removing them out. Once done, we will follow up with Tamiya's 2000 grit sanding sponge as well, and that should really get us ready for primer and paint in the next video. Alright guys, that is going to be a wrap on the body prep video. I know it was a long one, but there was a lot of stuff we needed to go over. A lot of stuff that we don't normally do, such as all the work with that body kit. So I felt it was really important to dedicate a video just to the prep work and getting this thing ready. If you are still here at the end of this video, you have no idea how much I appreciate you and how much I appreciate you watching. I appreciate everyone who watches my videos, but the ones who can sit through 40 minutes of me rambling, you guys are an absolutely special group. So next week's video is going to be the first update on the Porsche Boxster for the Porsche group build being hosted by the Scale Model Car podcast. A lot of great progress on that. That is looking fantastic. I do have the body painted and clear coated on the Mustang as well, so I will start editing on that video right away. So that's going to give us some time to get that edited out, and that will be coming out the week after. As always guys, thanks for watching and hanging out and building with me. I appreciate you, and I will catch you on the next one.